Have you ever heard of Albania? It's this small nation on the Adriatic coast that for, well, millennia has been caught right in the middle of clashing empires. It's a place defined by its rugged mountains and, honestly, an even more rugged spirit of survival. This is the story of how a nation, constantly squeezed from all sides, learned to bend but never, ever break.
I mean, really think about that. How does that even happen? That's the central question of Albania's history. It's this incredible story of endless conquest, but also unbreakable continuity. You've got Romans, Byzantines, Ottomans, and even 20th century superpowers all leaving their mark. And yet, through it all, they've somehow held on to a core identity, a unique language, and this fierce, unyielding will to just endure.
You know, in Albania, history isn't something you just find in a museum. It's everywhere. You can walk through pretty much any city and see ancient Roman walls right next to Ottoman bridges, all of it sitting in the shadow of these stark communist-era apartment blocks. It's a living, breathing landscape where every single stone tells a part of this incredible journey.
So to really get the story, we've got to go back. I mean, way, way back. Before written records, before empires, to the very first people who looked at these mountains and decided to call them home. This is the unwritten beginning of the Albanian story.
What's so amazing about this early period is the continuity. You see, in a lot of Europe, you had these waves of migration where one group would come in and completely replace another. But here, the archaeology shows something different. It shows a culture that just kept going. It evolved right there, in place, persisting through the ages. Tucked away in those rugged mountains, these early communities were never fully wiped out.
So as these tribes start interacting with the rest of the Mediterranean world, they get a name from outsiders, mostly the Greeks, and they called them the Illyrians. Now this wasn't one single unified nation, not at all. It was a huge collection of different tribes, and this decentralized nature, it was both their greatest strength, making them incredibly hard to conquer, and ultimately their fatal weakness. All right, so let's jump forward to the era where these tribes start to band together and consolidate their power. This is where we see the rise of some seriously formidable Illyrian kingdoms, powerful enough to go toe-to-toe with the great powers of the day, from the Macedonians to the, well, unstoppable Roman Republic.
You can really see this dramatic arc of power right here. First, back in the 4th century BCE, you've got King Bardillus, who builds this land-based kingdom that's actually strong enough to challenge Macedonia. Then, a century later, Queen Tuta completely shifts gears to the sea, and her navy basically dominates the Adriatic. But that kind of ambition put the Illyrians on a direct collision course with Rome, the new superpower on the block. And by 167 BCE, it was all over. Their independence was crushed by the Roman legions.
And if you want to understand the Illyrian mindset, this quote says it all. Roman envoys show up and demand that Queen Tuta stop her ships from raiding, and this was her response. For her, it was a sovereign right. For the Romans, it was a direct challenge to their growing empire. It just perfectly captures the confidence, the pride, and the total clash of worldviews that led straight to war.
So the Roman conquest definitely brought changes. You see these massive structures like this amphitheater, and it's clear the region was strategically important to the empire. But here's the thing. That Roman influence was really only skin deep. Sure, the cities adopted Roman ways, but the old Illyrian culture? It just retreated up into the highlands, where its language and its customs quietly survived, just waiting for the empire to fall. As the Roman Empire starts to crack and crumble, new powers sweep across the Balkans. Now, this medieval period really could have been the end of the Albanian story. But instead, it became this defining era of resistance, where a truly distinct Albanian identity finally emerged from the shadow of those collapsing empires.
You know, for a long time, historians kind of debated what actually happened to the Illyrians. Did they just vanish? Well, the answer, it turns out, is in the dirt. Archaeologists found this thing called the Kamani Kruja culture, which shows a clear, unbroken line of settlement from late antiquity right into the early Middle Ages. This wasn't a case of one population replacing another. It was an evolution. This culture is the crucial link that shows us how the Romanized Illyrians slowly became the medieval Albanians.
And out of this medieval world rises Albania's undisputed national hero, George Castrioti, who we know today as Skanderbeg. Now get this, he was actually raised as an elite commander in the Ottoman army, but he never forgot where he came from. In 1443, he deserted, rode back to Albania, and united all the feuding principalities under one banner to fight for independence.
For a quarter of a century, Just let that sink in for a minute. For 25 years, Skanderbeg's small league of mountain fighters held off the full, overwhelming might of the Ottoman Empire, one of the world's great superpowers. He defeated sultan after sultan. To the west, he was a legendary defender of Christendom. And at home, he became the undying symbol of Albanian resistance.
So after Skanderbeg's death, Albania was completely absorbed into the Ottoman Empire. And it stayed that way for almost 500 years. But the story of resistance, it wasn't over. It just changed. It morphed into a cultural and political struggle to forge a modern national identity.
So how did a modern nation finally come to be? Well, for centuries, Albanians were just part of the Ottoman system. But then in 1878, the empire was crumbling, and their neighbors were literally planning to carve up their lands. So Albanian leaders got together and formed the League of Prizren. Their demand was simple: unite the 4 Albanian inhabited provinces. Now, the Ottomans crushed the movement, but the spark was lit. The idea of a unified Albania was born, and in 1912, as the empire finally collapsed, Albanian leaders seized their moment and declared independence.
Now, if you thought the story was wild so far, just buckle up. The 20th century would turn out to be one of the most turbulent periods in Albania's entire history. The brand new state was incredibly fragile, and it got thrown into a century of radical experiments. From a kingdom to foreign occupation, and finally to one of the most extreme and isolated dictatorships on the planet.
So, in the period between the world wars, Albania actually became a kingdom under a man named Ahmed Zog, who crowned himself King Zog I. And his whole goal was to modernize a very, very traditional society. And honestly, these 2 photos of his sisters capture that tension perfectly. On the one hand, you have the deep-rooted traditions of the past, and on the other, this pull of Western modernity. Zog's kingdom was this authoritarian balancing act that, in the end, just couldn't stand up to the pressure from fascist Italy, which invaded in 1939.
World War II brought with it a powerful communist-led resistance movement, and its leader was this man, Enver Hoxha. After the war, he and his party seized power, and so began a 4-decade rule of absolute, total control and crushing isolation. The one thing you have to understand about Hoxha's regime was its extreme ideological purity. He was a devout Stalinist. I mean, his loyalty was so absolute that he ended up breaking with Yugoslavia, then the Soviet Union, and finally even China. And with each ideological split, Albania was pushed deeper and deeper into isolation. It was a political tool that Hoxha used to crush any rival influence and keep his grip on power.
And the ultimate symbol of this paranoia? It's literally etched into the landscape. Hoxha was afraid of being invaded by, well, everyone. So he launched this massive bunkerization program. Over 170,000 of these concrete bunkers were built. They're this haunting, physical legacy of a regime that was completely sealed off from the rest of the world by fear.
But of course, no system like that lasts forever. Enver Hoxha died in 1985, and then you had the wave of revolution sweeping across Eastern Europe. All of this set the stage for the dramatic collapse of communism in Albania, and the start of a difficult, chaotic, but ultimately hopeful new chapter.
The end finally came in February 1991. You had these massive crowds in the capital, Tirana, and they tore down the giant statue of Enver Hoxha. I mean, what a powerful symbol of liberation. But the transition to democracy was incredibly painful. The 90s brought economic collapse and even civil unrest. It was a truly chaotic and difficult birth for the new Albania.
And that brings us to today. The journey has been, frankly, remarkable. Albania is now a member of NATO and an official candidate for the European Union. Its society is vibrant and really looking to the future. Now, of course, there are still major challenges. Corruption and people leaving the country are serious issues. But through it all, Albania has re-emerged from total isolation to become a key player in the stability of the entire Balkan region.
So, from the ancient Illyrians to Skanderbeg's legendary stand to the crowds who tore down a dictator's statue, the history of Albania is really a testament to a profound, deep-seated resilience. That long, long journey of survival is now turning toward a future in Europe. After thousands of years of endurance, the next chapter in Albania's story is finally in its own hands.